Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a journey into a really powerful, maybe often overlooked work by one of literature's giants, Leo Tolstoy's Hadji Murad. We pulled together a whole stack of sources, Tolstoy's own notes, his war sketches, critical analyses, historical context, and we're here to sort of distill the most important insights for you. Our mission, to unpack this raw, gripping story of Hadji Murad and, well, explore its timeless insights into human nature, power, conflict, all of it.
So to kick things off, I want to take you straight to the very first image Tolstoy gives us in Hadji Murad. It's striking. He describes this beautiful crimson thistle. It's standing defiantly in a ditch, even after being trampled flat. It's crushed. One stalk is broken, another's blackened, but still it tries to live, to stand back up. What do you make of that as an opening?
Absolutely striking, isn't it? And what's immediately clear, I think, is how Tolstoy uses this really vivid image to introduce right away the central theme, resilience. This thistle, refusing to be utterly broken. It's not just a simple metaphor. It kind of shows us that resilience isn't always about, winning. Sometimes it's about fiercely choosing the terms of your own defeat. It's this quiet, defiant refusal to be erased, even when you're ruined. That sets the tone perfectly for the human spirit we're going to encounter throughout this whole story.
That's a really crucial distinction. Defiance, not just survival. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more. Before we dive deeper into Hadji Murad itself, we really need to get a handle on the man behind the words. Tolstoy. He was a young aristocrat full of ideals, and he found those ideals just colliding head-on with the brutal, messy reality of war.
Indeed. Yeah, his military service, especially during the Crimean War, that was 1854 to 56, it was a profound crucible for him, a real turning point. He served as an artillery officer during that brutal 11-month siege of Sevastopol. He even got recognized for courage, promoted to lieutenant. This wasn't like armchair observation. He was right there in the thick of it.
And that immersion, that direct experience, led straight to his Sevastopol sketches.
It really is a fascinating mosaic. You've got history, personal experience, all woven into this really dramatic narrative.
Yeah.
And what's particularly striking, I think, is how Tolstoy, right at the end of his life, goes back to these early military experiences to craft this incredibly vivid tale.
Yeah, revisiting his youth almost.
Exactly. And it gives us this unique window, not just into, a specific historical fight, but into these broader recurring patterns of human behavior, especially around empire.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the world of Leo Tolstoy and this, surprising and profound story he chose to tell. Okay, so to really get Hadji Murad, we first need to unpack some key things from Tolstoy's own life.
Yeah.
Because his experiences, they directly informed pretty much every page of this book.
They really did.
Many know him for War and Peace or Anna Karenina, obviously, but his time as a soldier, it's maybe less explored, but it's utterly crucial here.
That's exactly right. Tolstoy wasn't just, watching from the sidelines. What's interesting is he actually volunteered for military service. Initially, it was apparently to clear a gambling debt.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, in the Caucasus. He served 2 years, first as a cadet, then an officer. And later, of course, he saw action in the Crimean War.
Right.
And those experiences gave him the raw material for his very poignant Tales of Sevastopol.
And Tales of Sevastopol, wow. They really lay bare the brutal, unromantic reality of war, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. No glory there.
There's this profound, kind of counterintuitive insight in there, too. In 19th century warfare, the biggest killer wasn't always the enemy soldiers. It was often disease.
Invisible enemy.
Like we read that fewer than half of the 80,000 Russian soldiers who crossed the Put River in 1853 actually survived the campaign.
Yeah.
And most of those deaths, illness,
Yeah.
not bullets. It just reveals the sheer scale of suffering and this sort of bureaucratic indifference to it all. You really see it in the parts about Tsar Nicholas I. He's shown as sort of puffed up, misattributing plans to himself, dismissing real concerns. Like he takes credit for this military plan that wasn't even his idea, totally forgetting he argued for the opposite before. He's wrapped up in his own importance.
By showing us the Russians, the Chechens, the officers, the regular guys, the Tsar, Tolstoy makes you question any simple answers. Like he said in Sevastopol in May, right? The hero of my tale is truth. He shifts from seeing war as this splendid array of troops.
The parades in uniform.
Right, to seeing its true aspect, blood, suffering, and death. He just rips away the facade. He shows the vanity of officers like Paskukin, who cared more about social standing than actual courage. And just the cold, almost indifferent response to death and injury you see at the dressing stations.
The imagery he uses is just incredibly visceral. You get the raw truth of amputations, these frightful, blood-curdling screams coming from the dressing room, the frightful stench of decaying bodies during truces. It's such a powerful indictment of the whole system.
Yeah, it really is.
And you can see how this personal experience later in his life, it directly shaped his more radical views, his Christian anarchism. And then later in life, he got really disillusioned with Russian society, became much more of a pacifist. He was reading thinkers like Henry George, started critiquing private land ownership, the state itself. I mean, his later writings like Resurrection got him excommunicated from the Orthodox Church. Pretty radical stuff.
Excommunicated.
Yeah. So when he writes Hadji Murad, near the very end of his life, it's not just another story. It feels like a final statement almost, bringing together all these mature thoughts on war, power, morality.
So his critical view of state institutions, the justice system, everything, and his core belief that government is violence.
Yeah.
It's all deeply rooted in these direct, brutal observations he made as a young man.
He really evolved, didn't he? From soldier to sage almost. A profound critic of power structures.
Absolutely.
Okay, so with that background on Tolstoy's own transformation, let's set the historical stage for Hadji Murad. The book itself is set during the Caucasus War. Long, brutal conflict.
Yeah, really long, 1817 to 1864.
And this was basically Russia's relentless imperial expansion, pushing south into this region that was incredibly diverse and, well, fiercely independent.
Fiercely independent is right. And what's fascinating historically here is the Murid movement.
Tell us about that.
Well, it started as this peaceful, spiritual Islamic movement, Sufism, the mystical branch focused on inner devotion, equality, temperance.
Right.
But then in response to the Russian invasion, it completely transforms. It becomes this fierce military religious struggle for independence led by these charismatic imams like Shamil, who's a major figure in the book too.
Right, Shamil. And this whole conflict, Tolstoy introduces it symbolically right at the start of the book with this image of a thistle. A Tartar thistle, he calls it.
Oh, yes, the thistle.
The narrator tries to pick it, and he notes its energy and tenacity, how it sold its life dearly. Then later, he sees another one, all mutilated, crushed by a wheel maybe, but it's still defiantly alive. What's the insight there? What's Tolstoy doing with that?
Well, if you connect it to the bigger picture, the thistle is just this perfect symbol, isn't it? It embodies the spirit of the Chechen people and really Hadji Murad himself.
Resilient.
Exactly. Resilient, strong, beautiful in their own way, in their own environment, but facing these overwhelming, destructive imperial forces, trying to just crush them, uproot them.
Yeah.
The thistle's defiance, even when it's broken, that mirrors their perseverance against, pretty much impossible odds.
And speaking of defiance, let's get to the man himself, Hadji Murad. He's the central figure, this legendary Chechen warrior. He held the title of Naib.
What exactly was a Naib?
It was basically a military administrative role under Imam Shamil, like a governor or a deputy responsible for a region, a position of significant power and trust within the Chechen resistance. Got it.
Yeah.
And he makes this really shocking decision to defect from Imam Shamil to the Russians, the very people he'd been fighting.
Yeah, it's a huge turn. But his defection, it's crucial to understand, it isn't some simple act of betrayal, not in his eyes. Why take such a huge risk?
It boils down to something incredibly personal. His family,
What?
his mother, Padamat, his wives, his kids, they're being held captive by Shamil. So his whole plan, his hope, is that the Russians will help him rescue them. And you just feel this constant tension. He's stuck, right, between the Chechen resistance he came from and the Russian military machine he's now dealing with. It's all about these impossible choices, shifting loyalties, and just trying to hold on to his dignity in this vice.
His primary motivation, the reason he goes to the Russians, is to try and secure their release. He even says something like, "My family are in the hands of my enemy. Let the prince first exchange my family, and then I will destroy Shamil or die."
Wow, high stakes. But this path he chooses, going over the Russians, it's obviously filled with danger and, crucially, misunderstanding, right?
Completely. He immediately gets tangled up in the Russian military bureaucracy, the casual arrogance of the command, from the top guy, Viceroy Vorontsov, right down to the junior officers.
You see this constant tension, his fierce warrior code clashing with the Russians' world, which seems detached, often self-serving.
Yeah, and Tolstoy gives us these little moments, these observations, like Hadji Murad feeling repelled by and felt contempt for the major.
Right, the arrogance.
But then his eyes turning towards Maria Dmitrievna, this Russian woman, because he liked her simplicity and her sort of foreign type of beauty. It shows his humanity, but also that huge cultural gap.
Yeah, these details really highlight that chasm.
And it raises this really important question, doesn't it? Can someone truly switch sides like that without losing themselves? Or maybe getting lost between the sides?
Right.
His interactions just underscore this fundamental disconnect. He's worried about being poisoned by them. He doesn't speak to Kirilov, the Russian counselor.
And then Kirilov talks about him contemptuously in Russian, thinking Hadji Murad won't understand.
Exactly. He's caught in this total no-win situation. It's perfectly captured by that fable mentioned in the book.
Oh, the falcon.
Yeah, the Tavlinian fable about a falcon who had been caught and lived among men and afterwards returned to his own kind in the hills. But the other falcons wouldn't accept him back. He didn't belong anywhere anymore.
Caught between worlds. So, okay, we've got the man, the setting, the context. What does this all really mean? Hadji Murad's story, it feels like a microcosm of these much larger themes that echo way beyond the 19th century Caucasus. Let's talk about the individual versus state power first.
Indeed. And his choices seem less about big ideals and more about just saving his family. Almost no real agency.
Exactly. That personal code of honor is everything to him. Why won't he go back to Shamil, even if pardoned? Because Shamil has the blood of Murad's kin on his hands. It's personal, unbreakable. And that deep worry for his family, his mother, wives, children, drives absolutely everything. It's such a contrast to some of the Russian officers we see. Their motives are often about, ambition, vanity, even gambling debts, not this deep personal code.
Because Hadji Murad's struggle, it's deeply personal, isn't it? It's driven by family, by honor, by survival, very human motivations.
Totally.
Yet ultimately, he's crushed between these two impersonal, ruthless state powers. On one side, you have Shamil, the religious and military leader of the Chechens. Tolstoy doesn't portray him as some noble hero either. He's shown as equally tyrannical.
Also.
Well, Shamil threatens to blind or even kill Hadji Murad's son Yusuf and to scatter his family among different villages, these aouls. If Hadji Murad doesn't come back, it's brutal coercion.
And then on the other side, you've got the Russian imperial system. And Tolstoy gives us this chilling portrait of the Tsar himself, Nicholas III.
Yeah, described as over 70, but still quite fresh. Completely obsessed with his own greatness.
Taking credit for military successes that weren't his ideas.
Right, blatantly flattering his subordinates who feed his ego.
Right.
He's utterly disconnected from the reality on the ground.
Making these incredibly cruel decrees, like having mutinous peasants tried by court-martial, which basically meant sentencing them to run the gauntlet, a horrific punishment.
Or sending a newspaper editor off to serve in the army just for reporting on something inconvenient, like peasants being transferred to imperial estates. It shows the arbitrary cruelty of unchecked power.
It really does. And this starkly highlights another key theme, the futility of all this violence.
Which Tolstoy, as we saw, came to abhor. The sources and the book, they detail the destruction explicitly. Like the raid on Sato's village, the aouls.
Oh, what happened there?
Just senseless destruction by the Russians. The roof fallen in, the door and the posts supporting the penthouse burned, and the interior filthy. Just wrecking lives and homes.
And the reaction of the locals.
Tolstoy says they felt not just hatred, but
repulsion, disgust, and perplexity. Like, why this pointless violence? What Tolstoy really gets at is how this kind of imperial conflict traps everyone. It creates these moral gray zones where clear right and wrong just dissolve.
They couldn't even understand the point of such destruction.
It's violence for violence's sake, almost. Assertion of dominance.
Exactly. Tolstoy paints this picture of needless suffering, where destruction serves no real purpose beyond flexing imperial muscle.
And despite all his defiance, his desperate moves, Hadji Murad's own story ends so tragically.
It really does. He makes a break for it, tries to escape the Russians, but he's cornered.
He's ultimately mown down, the text off.
Yeah, and paraded around all the forts and aouls like this gruesome trophy. It's just shocking, brutal.
Yet right after describing this horror, Tolstoy writes that the nightingales now started their trills once more. What's the significance of that juxtaposition?
It's classic Tolstoy, isn't it? It underscores this idea of nature's indifference, its eternal return to beauty, totally separate from human brutality.
Like our conflicts are fleeting, ultimately meaningless in the grand scheme of things.
Precisely. It contrasts the ephemeral, vicious nature of human power struggles with the enduring cycles of the natural world. A really powerful and bleak commentary.
And all this brings us back to that tragedy of cultural misunderstanding we touched on earlier.
Fundamentally, yeah. The Russians just cannot grasp Hadji Murad's motivations. They can't see past their own categories.
So they see him as a brigand, maybe a curiosity, a wild mountain man.
Or just a useful pawn in their imperial game. His actions, his desperate attempt to save his family, they get interpreted through their own lens. Imperial ambition, careerism, suspicion.
Not through his deeply rooted sense of honor, family loyalty, his specific cultural code.
Exactly. They simply cannot see the complex human being behind the label of the other. And that failure to understanding is catastrophic for him.
Now, this deep dive into Hadji Murad, it also seems to reveal, maybe chillingly, a pattern of Russian imperial expansion that, well, echoes beyond that specific war.
Yeah.
The sources touch on this broader context.
They do. If you look at the bigger picture, the Crimean War, for instance, the one Tolstoy fought in.
Yeah.
Russia's defeat there led to the demilitarization of the Black Sea. It was a major blow to their prestige. They were seen by some in Europe almost as a semi-Asiatic state.
So how did they react?
Well, one reaction was to compensate for that defeat in the West by pushing harder with expansion in Asia. It was partly, the sources suggest, to restore national pride, but also partly to distract Great Britain on the world stage, sort of intensifying what became known as the Great Game for influence in Central Asia.
So the pressure shifts, but the expansionist drive continues.
Exactly. It highlights how imperial powers often react to setbacks not by rethinking, but by redirecting their aggression elsewhere. The fundamental impulse remains.
So the crushing of local populations, this assertion of imperial power, the dehumanization of the other that we see so vividly in Hadji Murad's story, these aren't just isolated incidents from the 19th century Caucasus. Tolstoy was observing these recurring themes, these mechanisms of an expansionist drive that played out again and again.
Yes, he saw how these patterns of power, violence, and misunderstanding were intrinsic to the imperial project itself, regardless of the specific location or time period. So, with all these complex themes and characters, how does Tolstoy actually tell the story? What's different about his style here?
The narrative voice is really interesting. It's very calm, very observational, but there's this subtle irony running underneath.
Yeah, you get that sense, and it feels so different from, say, War and Peace. That book is vast, sprawling. Hadji Murad is so much tighter, lean, focused. It feels like a later style, maybe, more refined. Every word counts.
Absolutely. It's incredibly economical. And the structure itself is key. That non-linear episodic feel. We jump from Murad trying to negotiate to, like, the Vorontsov high society parties, to the trenches with common soldiers, even into the Tsar's daily routine. This kind of fragmented approach, it really adds to the realism, but also the sense of inevitability. Fatalism. Like no one person sees the whole picture.
Right. And that connects to using all those different perspectives. It makes it hard to just pick a side, doesn't it?
It really is so much more than just a historical novel, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this profound commentary on the nature of power, the individual's struggle against these overwhelming forces, the brutal futility of conflict, and that isolating tragedy of cultural chasms.
The power of Tolstoy's observation that truth, as he often called it, the thing he loved so much, it just shines through in every detail, doesn't it?
It really does. And it forces us, even today, to confront some uncomfortable realities about human nature and about the mechanisms of empire, which sadly persist well beyond the 19th century.
And for you, the learner, maybe this story is a potent reminder that even within these grand historical narratives, the personal stakes, the human cost, it's just immense.
Yeah.
It kind of invites you to consider, how do your own loyalties, your values, how do they align or maybe clash with the systems of power that surround you?
How does it still speak to us?
Oh, it resonates incredibly strongly. The themes, imperialism, nationalism, the brutality of war, these are conversations we're still having constantly all over the world. Think about the East versus West dynamics in the story, the cultural clashes, the misunderstandings. We still see that playing out. And it makes you think hard about who gets called a hero and who gets called a traitor in these conflicts. It often depends entirely on who holds power and who's telling the story, doesn't it? Murad's choices, driven by protecting his family, could easily be spun as betrayal by those he opposed.
That's a really powerful point. It's interesting, too, how the book itself was received. It wasn't even published until 1912, after Tolstoy died. And at first, people kind of missed it.
Yeah, it was sort of underrated initially, maybe overshadowed by the epics, like you said. Perhaps it was too direct, too focused for people expecting another huge novel. But over time, its reputation just grew and grew. Critics like Harold Bloom, even Hemingway, praised it highly. They saw its brilliance. Its influence is definitely there. on writers exploring war, resistance, moral ambiguity. That lean, unflinching style had an impact.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive on Hadji Murad. We've looked at this incredible portrait of one man caught between huge forces, Tolstoy's sharp critique of power, and just how relevant these themes still feel.
It really is a masterpiece that deserves more readers. Its brevity makes it accessible, but its depth is immense. It asks these timeless questions about honor, loyalty, the human cost of conflict.
Perhaps it leaves us wrestling with this final thought. Can genuine understanding, true empathy, ever really bridge that chasm between different cultures, different powers?
Or are we, sometimes, like Hadji Murad, just destined to be caught, maybe even crushed, between forces that are too vast, too entrenched for us to truly comprehend or control?
Heavy question.
A powerful thought to definitely mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of knowledge. And there you have it, our deep dive into Leo Tolstoy's Hadji Murad.